There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel, and here I am with another Friday Reads taped on Thursday afternoon, and I am at the University of Saskatchewan campus, and I'm sitting in front, you saw the little bit of footage, I am sitting in front of an Indigenous Student Center. It's called the Gordon Oaks Red Bear Student Center, and Red Bear was a Indigenous chief in Saskatchewan of some significance. I'm quite sure Sharon knew him and has mentioned him in one of the recent memoirs. I've read so many of her memoirs recently, I'm not sure which one. Editing Shawn here. I want to do a much better job at describing this man because I've now looked up more information and we need to hear more about him. So I'm going to read from the University of Saskatchewan Library website. A couple paragraphs about him. The man the building was named after, Gordon Oaks Red Bear, was a spiritual and community leader who guided many in his community and across Saskatchewan. He was born in 1932 in what is now the Nekanitë First Nation, and passed away in early 2002. Oaks believed in Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples working together for each other's mutual benefit, using the analogy of a team of horses pulling together and living in balance to impart this teaching. Because he held a strong belief in education and honoring one's culture and traditions, this building is named in his memory. Gordon Oaks Red Bear served as the chief of the Nekanitë First Nation from 1958 to 1962, and again from 1970 to 1992. Throughout this time, he worked passionately for treaty land entitlement until it was finally adopted by the province. Oaks also sat at the treaty tables within the treaty governance processes of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. In all of his work, he helped shape the understanding of the treaty relationship as it exists in Saskatchewan. As an elder, Gordon Oaks served as a board member of the Wanuskewin Heritage Park. Through his work, he also helped to bring to fruition the eventual placement of the Okimah OC Healing Lodge in the Cypress Hills. He created the Treaty 4 flag, which is now used by Treaty 4 First Nations as a symbol of connectedness. The building was opened in February 2016. It's a beautiful building. When Kenji and I were here a couple weeks ago, I walked through it and it's gorgeous. And it's new since my days. This is the second time I've done a Friday Reads on campus. I did one maybe 3 years ago, the first summer or spring or whatever that I was back in town. I have a good reason to come back today because Kenji is doing his training. Day one of his 5 days worth of training. And so he's on campus and Mom is picking us both up and we're going furniture shopping and then out for Vietnamese food. The most delicious Vietnamese food you can get probably in Canada. It's called Nhong Nhong, and it's not, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'll spell it below. The really cute Vietnamese waiter laughed at me when I tried to pronounce it, but he pronounced it correctly, and my tongue doesn't work that way, but it is absolutely delicious. So it's going to be a good day. And so I'm here an hour or so early before I'm to meet Kenji and meet Mom to do my Friday Reads. My grandmother graduated here in 1920, my paternal grandmother. My maternal grandfather graduated from the Theological College, St. Andrews, which is here in, I think, 1940, something like that. My father didn't graduate from here, but he did do, I think, 3 years of vocational agriculture. He thought it was a complete waste of time and didn't finish, and that would have been in the late 50s or something like that. And my mom got a BA and her divinity, her theology degree from St. Andrews, just like her father had. And I was born here at the University Hospital more than a few years ago, and I have 2 degrees, two undergraduate degrees. I'll leave it at that. Hold on, Shawn. Kenji doesn't watch my videos, but if he saw me talk about all the important things in my biography that happened here, and I didn't mention that this is also where Kenji and I got married, in the St. Andrews Theological College's church, I might get divorced. That was the latest of the important things that have happened for me and Kenji. at the University of Saskatchewan campus. My goodness. So yeah, this is home for me in many ways. And it feels just wonderful that Kenji is going to start his working life in Canada here. The other thing I want to say personally is I'll say more about what's going on with the farm in a few weeks, but we're bringing a lot of stuff in from the farm. And one of the things that I brought is a box full of audio cassette tapes. I kept an audio journal, I think starting in about 1984, 85. I had kept a handwritten one in high school, and I don't know what made me switch over to audio, but I've saved all those cassettes, and I think I did it for about 10 years off and on. So there are garbage bags, at least probably 3 garbage bags full of all those cassettes. And they were stored in the hired man's quarters up above the shop at the farm. No temperature control, so really cold in the winter and really hot in the summer, and completely inappropriately stored. And nobody has a tape recorder. In fact, my nephew Michael has a truck that has an audio cassette player in it, and we put one of them in and it worked. And so I brought them in and I bought myself a little handheld tape recorder. And they all seem to be still working. Still, the audio is still there. And so I am in the middle of listening to one of my audio journals made when I was 21, October 1987. So I would have been almost 22. And I'd been out of the closet about a year. And my voice is recognizably my voice, but it sounds like a young man's voice. It's fascinating and not eerie, but it's doing a real number on me. It's a good thing. And I'm sure that I'm going to do something with all these, get them transcribed. I think you can now, AI or whatever software will transcribe them, convert them to digital files. But on a deeper level, immersing myself into the young man that I was, and those tapes will go through. I also saved all my voicemails and all that stuff. I'm just flabbergasted that I now have access to all this stuff that could very well have been destroyed just from improper storage over decades. So that's something. I also am delighted to tell you that I have a new Patreon. Did you remember that I had a Patreon account? And I have a handful of people that have been supporting me for years. Haven't had any new ones for quite some time, so this was an absolute delight. And this new patron is Louise Els, last week's mystery guest. She paid for a full year at the Book Buddy level, and has been, as you remember, those of you who saw the mystery guest chat from last week, and if you didn't, you should go back, because she's extraordinary. Both as a human being and as a writer. I'm looking forward to reading her stuff, and she has joined my Patreon. So how lovely. Thank you so much, Louise, for everything. So that was wonderful. And without further ado, let's meet this week's very interesting mystery guest. And this week's mystery guest is the Black gay Canadian writer H. Nigel Thomas, joining us from Montreal. He is the author of, most recently, the novel A Different Hurricane, which came out in January of this year. And he has a large list of publications, perhaps most well known for his 1993 novel, Spirits in the Dark. H. Nigel Thomas, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure being here.
You are one of the leading gay Black voices. It's just fantastic that I am having this opportunity to chat with you. Perhaps we'll get started by having you introduce us to your most recent novel, A Different Hurricane. Can you tell us what this is all about?
To put it in a thematic nutshell, it's really about gays in the Caribbean who feel constrained to hide their sexuality, and so they mask as heterosexuals. And what the novel explores is the price that they pay for doing so. The story is told through Gordon and his boyfriend Alan and their wives Maureen and Beth and son. So they were Maureen, Gordon's wife, eventually finds out that he's gay, and she writes a journal, and which she does not really want the public, even their own daughter, to know about. But somehow circumstances work in such a way that it all becomes appended in the end. So that's the novel in a nutshell.
What era is it set in? Is it set close to the present or farther back in the past?
The actual narrative in terms of time is told in flashback during a week in September. It's actually while Hurricane Irma is battering the Caribbean.
Okay.
This is in 2017, I think. And over that week, Gordon's daughter is visiting from Toronto. And all of the events actually come together, they culminate during that particular week. Yes. Flashbacks date all the way back from Gordon's childhood.
Yeah. Okay. And
When he was about, I would think they cover a period from about age 4, because he meets Alan, who became his boyfriend, in kindergarten, actually.
it's set on your native island of St. Vincent in the Caribbean.
Exactly.
And from what I understand from the back cover, both of these boys who grow up to be men, they study abroad, but
Mhm.
ultimately come back to St.
Right.
Vincent. So I'm assuming there's a whole bunch of post-colonial stuff swirling around in this story. Would that be fair to say?
Not, I would not say a great deal of it. They do have a neighbor who has some hankering for the colonial days, but he's a very good man. I'm not even sure that it's purely driven by a sort of like a colonial residue, though it comes across like that. He's more concerned about the future of his own gay son. He wishes that St. Vincent was still under the colonial regime, then his son would be a citizen of Great Britain and life would be better for his son. It's probably from that lens that he is hankering for the colonial days.
They study abroad and find a much less homophobic environment there, but they both choose, and we don't want you to give too much away in your answer to my question, but they both ultimately return home. What do you want to tell us about that part of the story?
Gordon studies in Montreal and Alan studies both in Jamaica and in Great Britain. In Gordon's case, he has a daughter who was born just before he leaves to come abroad to study. And he wants to return home to parent his daughter. He came on a scholarship, and that scholarship is he has a contract to work for the Vincentian government for at least 7 years. So for those two reasons, he goes back home. With Alan, Alan doesn't care so much about living in St. Vincent or not living in St. Vincent. He seems to be a lot more relaxed about the homophobia in St. Vincent. He's also not as careful in the way he goes about his life, which leads to very interesting things in the novel's plot, yes.
Where did this story come from? Was it something in your own life? I am always interested in where the spark of a work of fiction comes from.
There are two elements to the story. I begin with the lesser one. The lesser one is parenting. I deal with it in quite a few of my novels. I'm somebody quite dissatisfied, very dissatisfied about the way Caribbean children are parented. And that comes out of my own experience. There's hardly a day that some thought doesn't come to mind about it. What is really good parenting? That was one thing. And what sort of responsibility do parents have to their children? In this particular case, Gordon. The second element of the story is the whole business of what does it cost to hide your identity for decade upon decade of your life? What is the price? And then who pays for all of this? Is it just you or is it your family? And in this particular case, and I'm not giving away anything here, Gordon ends up infecting his wife with HIV. Everyone knows the story about HIV, AIDS, and that sort of a thing. But on a more personal note, I had friends here in Montreal, Caribbean friends, who were married, who led double lives, hid it from their wives. And in two cases, those friends and their wives, and in one case, one child died as a result. And it's always haunted me over the years that people could feel so constrained. It's necessary to present a lying face to the world. And then, of course, all sorts of other innocent people pay for that decision.
You have already told us that the present day part of the story is set around the time of, was it Hurricane Alma?
Irma.
Irma, which was
Yeah,
about 25 or so years ago.
yeah.
So I'm curious about the title, which is A Different Hurricane. What other hurricane is this novel concerned with?
Well, the second hurricane is really what happens in the story. The novel begins rather sedately, but it doesn't end so sedately. And it's that metaphorical hurricane, so to speak.
As part of the segue into talking about the other novel I have in my hand, Spirits in the Dark from 1993, I noticed that this one is set, at least most of the story is set in St. Vincent, whereas, if I understand it correctly, Spirits in the Dark was set on a fictional Caribbean island. And
Absolutely. Spirits in the Dark is my first novel. And I was writing more about a generic Caribbean identity. If I had set it on a known island, people would then begin to associate it with that particular island. But in setting it on a generic Caribbean island, the readers are forced to think of it in Caribbean terms. And so that was my motivation for inventing an island, so to speak.
you have written several other novels, works of fiction. Are some of them set in fictional Caribbean locations and others in St.
No,
Vincent?
there, real St. Vincent and Isabella Island are the two locations for my works. I have two other novels that are set on Isabella Island. And what I think might very well end up being my last novel, which I'm working on, in fact, I was working on it just before I spoke to you, is also set on Isabella Island.
Okay. It's a rich place in your imagination.
Yeah, it's a place I use when I don't want to get into too much trouble.
Well, tell us more about Spirits in the Dark.
But Spirits in the Dark was written at a time when I was grappling with my sense of who I was as a Caribbean man living in Canada. And the question in my mind was, who is a Caribbean person? Who is a West Indian? What makes one a West Indian? And the question haunted me. It actually came out, the novel was born out of a short story, actually, which is incorporated into the novel itself. It's about this boy who is expelled from school because he's become aware of the colonial situation and he's responding to it in not the nicest of language. But it grew from there. It grew and it became a novel about identity and what colonialism does to one's identity. Why do we prefer the colonizer? What price do we pay for accepting colonization? And in this particular case, in Spirits in the Dark, it's a rejection by Jerome, the protagonist, of his parents and his community in order to accord better with the colonial vision of reality. In the novel, it's represented as a sickness, which indeed prevents Jerome from functioning as a psychically healthy individual. And so he really does have to come to terms with that sickness. And the novel, the ending of the novel, is really about how he manages. The structure of the novel, in fact, is this is a ritual, the ritual that he undergoes in order to come to terms, to face the issues, the structures, the beliefs that had deformed him.
And I believe that he's under the spiritual guidance of someone named Pointer Francis. Tell us a
Exactly.
little bit about Pointer Francis.
He is more of someone who is a griot in the African tradition. He's a repository of, I guess you would say, African wisdom, and not necessarily someone who accepts in any sort of Broadway Christian doctrines, but rather what he accepts are the ethics of Christianity, the ethic of Christianity without its rituals. But he's very much in tune with the best of West African belief and customs. and some of the West African rituals, for example. The inspiration for the ritual comes from I guess you can call it a neo-African cult, probably I should say religion, that exists in St. Vincent and elsewhere in the Caribbean called the Spiritual Baptists. And one of the things that their members must do is go through a sort of a sensory deprivation ritual, which allows them or facilitates, I should say, an encounter with the deeper aspects of their psyche. So that actually was a huge part of my writing the novel.
So you have been writing and publishing gay and Black themed literature since the 90s. Can you give us a bit of a description of how things have changed? What was the reception when Spirits in the Dark first came out compared to how, for example, the reception has been to A Different Hurricane?
There isn't really a difference, quite frankly. When A Different Hurricane came out, I remember the day that I launched it, I told the audience at the launch, and I'm quoting, I sent all the information about A Different Hurricane to all the media in St. Vincent, and I guarantee you not one of them will even mention it. And that turned out to be true. What's interesting is that Vincentians who write as much as an insignificant pamphlet get sometimes full pages of notice in the local press. They're glad to gobble that stuff up, especially if they live abroad, because for them, it's somebody who's gone abroad and done quite well. But my stuff with gay themes is taboo. Yeah, I am a pariah in St. Vincent. However, there's one exception. There is a program there that's called Page Turners. It's, I guess you can say it's based in St. Vincent because two of the main reviewers in it are located in St. Vincent. It's edited in St. Vincent and it's actually shown on ITV. And they afterwards decided to review the novel and to interview me. So in that sense, perhaps I'm probably saying, yeah, things have changed, but I happen to know a little bit more about that program and the people involved in the program. So it's really because of who these people are that the novel was taken up. Otherwise, it would not have been. When Spirits in the Dark was published, it had a very glowing review in the press in Barbados. My second to last novel, Easily Fooled, was reviewed in Trinidad. But in terms of people being comfortable, in terms of the press or the media in the Caribbean being comfortable reviewing my books, no, there's discomfort there. There's discomfort there. There's one literary festival that invites me. None of the others do.
We're sure lucky to have you in Canada. So
Yeah, I consider myself lucky to be here.
wow.
And Vincentians oftentimes don't like to hear me say that.
What are you working on now?
I am working on a novel that is based, like this last novel, on an issue that has bothered me for many years. Not even sure I should say what it is. But it's a woman who abuses her children in a way, or at least one of her children, in a way that is even egregious to Caribbean people. When I heard the story, and it's a well-known story, it bothered me, it bothered me, it bothered me. How can a mother do this? And so I'm trying to, my interest in writing is really to explore the whole process of being, who we are, why we do the things we do, maybe as a way of getting to know myself better, I don't know. But why would a woman do this? And she has 3 children. And of course, her behavior impacts her children. And I'm looking at how the children as well react to what their mother did.
Wow, that sounds incredible. I'd like to pre-book you to come back when ready to launch into the world.
Yep, I would be happy to do. Let's
Great.
hope it gets finished and published and all of that.
And I think you have a few books to recommend. I'd love to hear what kind of stuff you read.
Oh, I read quite widely, but I seem to have a preference for fiction and poetry. Recently, I wrote about 7 or 8 books that I had read, the last 7 or 8 books that I had read. Given the times we live in, I would certainly recommend Octavia Butler's The Parable of the Sower. This is a dystopian novel by Valérie Bah, Subterrane, Subterrane. Quite interesting from a point of view of its narrative style, set in 2 different communities, and the story is told by many characters, some of whom recur. The characters are all placed in the art world. So a very interesting novel with an incredible knowledge. She has an incredible knowledge of the various arts. The third one I would recommend is by actually a friend of mine, Clayton Bailey, Murderers I Have Known. And it's not so much like a whodunit. These are not whodunit stories. These are stories that focus on the psychology of the narrator who comes upon these murders. None of these narrators is the murderer. They are people who discover these murderers and are responding psychologically to the murderers.
That sounds incredible because I really deeply dislike the genre of murder mysteries.
So
And
do
I've
I.
always said I want to read a book that it shows the psychological effects, the
Yeah.
trauma, the grief, all of that stuff of
Yeah.
the loved ones left behind. So now you have put that book before me and I shall seek it out.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the writer who is your friend. I've never heard his name before.
He's actually from Manitoba. He's mostly known as a photographer. At one point, he actually taught photography at the University of Montreal, Clayton Bailey. You should probably interview him. He's an interesting fellow. Yeah. He has 2 novels as well. One of them, I think, was shortlisted for the Hugh MacLennan Award here in Montreal. He's very much focused on the visual as well. So his writing is very cinematic.
H. Nigel Thomas, what an absolute privilege it was to chat with you. And once I've had a chance to read one or both of your novels, I would love to invite you back for a deeper dive kind of chat if you are.
Yeah, I would love it. I would certainly love it. And thanks for having me. And I thank you very much as well for the fine work you do. I mean, this is hard work, what you're doing, but you obviously love it.
I do. So I had heard of H. Nigel Thomas for years. I'm not sure which one I'll start with. The one he's most well known for, Spirits in the Dark, or the most recent one, A Different Hurricane. I'll probably start with the older one, but they sound very interesting. All right, I have put 2 videos up this week, a new episode that was about almost an hour long of Sharon, i.e. Sharon Batalla, and Shawn talk books. And that was a wonderful conversation, and it took me a long time to edit it. So it is now up there. We focused particularly on the Dublin Prize-winning Newfoundland novel, The Adversaries, by Michael Crummey. But a bunch of other books as well, and she gives you all a preview of her memoir. I meant to include this in my personal news, so I'll include it here. And that is that she has asked me to be the on-stage interviewer for her book launch, which will be at McNally Robinson's in Saskatoon, September 12th. It's not a stage. The person who asked her questions as part of the book launch, and I'm very honored to do so. I was taken aback and questioned whether I would be any good at it, and I may not be. It'll be my first try. I might not win any awards for confidence and presence and interviewer acumen, but I really am cut out to do it because I'm so familiar with so much of her work. And I'm deep into reading the memoir, How to Breathe Water, and it is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. So, what an honor. The other video just went up early this morning, I think. my Women in Translation Month TBR video. You can check those out. So I have finished 2 books. I'll give a very preliminary check-in on one that I've just gotten started. And I'm going to start a bunch. It's Women in Translation Month. Today, you'll see this on August 1st. I'm filming it the day before. And I'm keen to get started on a bunch of stuff. So here we go. Just earlier today, I finished the audiobook for Hotline by Dimitri and Nasrallah. And I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't quite love it. And I hope by the end of telling you about it, I'll have a better understanding of why I didn't quite love it. It was a very affecting story, first-person fictional account of a Lebanese immigrant to Canada with her young son. Her husband went missing during the war in Lebanon, and this was set in about 1984, 85, something like that. And his body wasn't found, but everybody said he must be dead, and then they were already applying to immigrate to Canada, and so she and her kid were pushed out of the country by her in-laws who didn't care for her too much. And she is a great storyteller, or the author is a great storyteller and makes his narrator one, about the hardships that she endures in that first year. She wants to be a French teacher, but nobody wants to hire a French language teacher with an Arabic accent. So she gives up on that, and she gets this job at this diet food company where they send you boxes of food, so that if you only eat their food, you're guaranteed to lose a lot of weight. And so it's part telemarketing and part counseling that she's doing with the clients. And that job goes really well for her. She's very cynical about it at first, but does really well, and within a matter of months becomes their top selling person. I should have said this is set in Montreal. One of the interesting things about this novel, which was written in English, not translated, is that she's speaking in French, and she indicates to the reader that she's speaking in French, or she signals when she moves from speaking Arabic to her son, or in another context, to speaking French to somebody else, or switching into English in rare instances. And I thought that was really well done. I was worried in the middle. There's about 50 pages where everything was coming up roses for her, and I was invested enough in her character that I liked that, but I also thought, how realistic is this? It's a little bit too rags to riches, and I don't mean riches, but just everything suddenly seems, but that only lasted for about 50 pages, and then lots of other challenges, some long buried or whatever, and some new ones came up, and so I thought, okay, no, this is realistic, and it is really well done. What I'm struggling with is this and maybe Lindy, you'll comment privately or leave a comment publicly about this, because I know you read and enjoyed it. I probably did it on audio. The audio was wonderful. This is not a spoiler on it. I'm going to talk about it vaguely so as to make it even less of a spoiler, but it absolutely is not a spoiler. She gets an authoritative opinion on these diet things that she's selling, that they are actually really bad for people's health. She gets that information from an authoritative source, maybe 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the novel. And then it's as if she doesn't remember that. Certainly she doesn't do anything about it, and stays with that company right till the end of the novel, and is a rising star at this telemarketing type diet food company. And I wonder why the novel didn't take that thread and run with it, develop it, because it's raised and then just left. Maybe there's a method to Nasrallah's madness about that he just wanted it to be left in the reader's mind, that Mona, the protagonist, was becoming a success in Western terms, shedding her Middle Eastern identity in many ways, and certainly capitalist values of the West, that she was fitting in, and that he was inviting the reader to problematize that, perhaps. Otherwise, it was just kind of a flaw. Don't raise it and then, she doesn't... I can't decide. There's another reason why I didn't quite love it, and that was, and this is probably a cultural difference, but no, I don't think it's a cultural difference. I know from lots of loved ones in my life that part of the grieving process is actually having conversations and dreams where you're talking to your deceased partner, spouse, and there is a lot of that in here, and I thought there was too much. There was some twists with that at the end that were really powerful, but it started to feel a little bit too sentimental, which kind of went together with my feeling that the whole rags to riches thing was a bit overdone for a certain length of time. Because I have those issues with it, it's maybe a 4-star read, but it's a really strong 4-star read for me. And I like the writing, I like the characterization, and I really enjoyed the audiobook. I would read more by Dimitri, Nasrallah. Absolutely. But now on to pure gold in terms of my reading life this year. I have finished reading this 1943 British novel to my mum. Oh, the Brave Music by Dorothy Evelyn Smith, published the year my mother was born, and we loved it so deeply that I think we both feel a bit of a book hangover. It was just so good, and I am so curious as to why Dorothy Evelyn Smith isn't more widely known. This is as good as any British women's fiction of its type. It's a coming-of-age story, and there are echoes of Bronte and Anne of Green Gables, actually, in this impish, impudent young girl who is the product of a Methodist preacher and I think an Anglican mother who didn't come from a religious family. It's a loveless marriage, and there's a whole bunch about the marriage, and she and her sister have a kind of conflicted relationship. Her emotional home becomes one of her father's parishioners, Rosie, whose dad is a rich, almost tycoon-type businessman in the town. And despite that, it becomes an emotional home for her. Rosie is like a mother figure. And there's a boy that they're raising who becomes her soulmate, David. It's the coming-of-age story of our protagonist, Ruan, but also of David. And the characters are finely wrought, and the plot is lovely. It was a chunky novel, 300 pages. I wish it had been longer. We didn't want it to end. The British Library Women's Writers Series has brought it back into print, so that's great. And another one of Smith's, one that's about spinsters, has been brought back by the Furrowed Middlebrow imprint of Dean Street Press. So she is getting some attention. I wouldn't compare her to somebody like, I guess one of her contemporaries would be Rosamund Lehman, and I wouldn't put her, she's not of that caliber of a writer, but she's a very fine writer, gifted storyteller, and this is one of my favorite novels by 20th century British women. I would put her on the same, she is as good as Barbara Pym, I would say. The comparison dies there. I think what she does in this novel is as good as what Barbara Pym did in her best novels, but the style is quite different. There is quite a bit of humor and pathos, and I just loved it so much. I'm going to be evangelizing about this one, and I think there's going to be another video about this coming down the pipe. So that's what I finished. I will very briefly check in a preliminary way about the book I started reading to my mum now that we're done with that one. I read the first maybe 4 or 5 chapters last night, and they're all about a page and a half or 3 pages at the most, so it was 20 minutes worth of reading to get through those first 5 chapters. Clear by the Welsh writer Carys Davies, who never writes any of her fiction set in Wales. This one is set on a Scottish island, and I have to do a little bit of research on the Scottish clearances. I know I've read that history. I think I first found out more about it by reading that Graham Burnett novel that I talked about briefly with Sharon in the latest video, because part of the story at least is set in that same era. But the Scottish clearances, as far as I understand, it says right here, the rural poor were moved off their land by landowners. And so in that context, a local minister has been hired, and he's so poor he needs the money, so he's been hired to travel to this island, and his job is to get that one remaining guy off the land. And so that man, who's hermit-like, living there by himself, and this clergyman who's come across the water to the island to get him to leave somehow, or to force him to leave. Those are the 2 main characters, and there's alternating chapters. And that preacher man, he stumbles and falls just hours after he gets on the island, and he falls down a cliff falls down a cliff and is badly hurt. And I know from the synopsis, so it's not a spoiler because it's on the synopsis, that he's nursed back to health by this man that he was supposed to be evicting. And that nice hermit-like man doesn't know anything about this guy or why he's come to the island, and that's the story. I absolutely loved the first 5 short chapters, and Mom thinks it's going to be good too, so we'll carry on with that. I'm going to start 3 for Women in Translation Month. Heart Lamp and Other Stories by Banu Mushtaq, translated from the Canada by Deepa Basti, won the Booker International Prize this year. I have the audiobook and the book. I'm going to do that kind of a combo and get into that. I'm going to get started with this Palestinian short story collection, Out of Time, by Samira Azzam, translated from the Arabic by Rania Abdulrahman. And I'm also going to start the novel that Tina Covert translated from the French, and it is called Belle, Greene by Alexandra Lapierre. And I'm not going to tell you anything about what it's about because I just talked about it on my TBR video, but I'm looking forward to it. And I'll do that when I bought the hardcover, but I'll probably do it mostly on audio. We'll see. But I'm looking forward to getting those started. Plus, a long-term supporter of this channel, Robin, is a top-tier patron, and top-tier patrons get 2 buddy reads if they want them with me a year. And so the second of those 2, the Zoom discussion we recorded for our first book, is still in my editing pipeline. I have quite a backlog, which is the happiest of problems. But I'm about to get started on the second one, and that is one written by a memorable mystery guest I had, A Bad Decade for Good People by Joe Bedford. And Robin was quite taken with him and what she learned about this debut novel that came out, I think, in 2022. So we're going to read it together. I'll put a link to that mystery guest chat. I should say a little bit about it. It opens in 2016. It's a group of really politically active young people set in Brighton, or at least in part, and the EU or Brexit referendum is in full swing, the campaign for that, I think. And the central character is queer, or certainly there's some queer characters in it. Intriguing title. Premise sounds great. I'll have more to say about it in due course. So, that's the kind of week it's been. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for watching.